Hey, you made it. Soften your shoulders and let's gently step into a slow story from ancient Greece. When people say ancient Greece, they often imagine a single place and time. White stone temples under a blue sky, philosophers arguing in the sun, athletes running naked in a stadium, and statues frozen in perfect calm. But for the people who actually lived there, ancient Greece was not one country, one era, or one way of life. It was a wide, uneven world made up of hundreds of communities, spread across mountains, islands, coastlines, and distant colonies, all connected by language, trade, religion, and habit, but separated by politics, customs, and daily realities. To understand what life was like in ancient Greece, the first thing to let go of is the idea of unity. There was no Greece in the modern sense, no central capital, no shared government, no single law that applied everywhere. Instead, there were city-states, small, independent political units that governed themselves, defended themselves, and often fought each other. Each city-state had its own laws, its own calendar, its own priorities, and its own version of what a good life looked like. A person living in Athens would have experienced daily life very differently from someone living in Sparta. Someone on a small island in the Aegean would not have lived the same way as a farmer inland, surrounded by hills and far from the sea. Even within the same city, life could feel entirely different depending on wealth, status, gender, age, and freedom. The focus stays away from heroic myths and famous speeches, and stays with ordinary life. Waking up in the morning, finding food, working, caring for family, navigating rules, honoring traditions, and trying to stay healthy in a world without modern medicine. To do that, we need to understand the physical and social landscape people were born into. Geography shaped almost everything. The Greek world was dominated by mountains. Steep, rocky ridges divided regions from one another, making overland travel slow and difficult. Valleys were small and often isolated. Large, flat plains, the kind that support massive agriculture, were rare. This meant communities developed locally, often cut off enough to form their own identities, accents, and traditions. At the same time, the sea was everywhere. Coastlines stretched endlessly, islands dotted the water in every direction, harbors were easier to reach than neighboring valleys. For many Greeks, the sea was not a barrier. It was a road. Boats connected cities faster than land routes ever could. Fish, salt, pottery, oil, wine, and stories moved constantly across the water. This combination, isolated land routes and open sea routes, created a world where people were both deeply local and surprisingly connected. You might spend most of your life within a few miles of your home, yet eat food grown far away, use pottery made in another city, and hear news carried by sailors who had crossed half the Aegean. There was no single Greek lifestyle, but there were shared patterns. Across the Greek world, people spoke related dialects of the same language. They worshipped many of the same gods, even if local versions differed. They shared similar architectural styles, similar tools, and similar assumptions about family structure, honor, and public behavior. A traveler moving from one Greek city to another would recognize the basics of daily life, even if the details changed. Time itself felt different in ancient Greece. There were no mechanical clocks. Time was measured by the sun, by shadows, by meals, and by seasons. Days followed a loose rhythm. Dawn brought activity. Midday heat slowed everything, and evenings gathered people back into homes or public spaces. Weeks and months were shaped by religious calendars, festivals, and agricultural cycles. Life moved at a human pace. Most people rose with the light. Artificial lighting was limited and expensive, usually small oil lamps that cast weak, flickering light. Work that required vision was done during daylight. Darkness meant rest, storytelling, quiet conversation, or sleep. Seasons mattered deeply. Winter brought cold and scarcity. Summer brought heat and long days. Harvest times were intense and exhausting. Bad weather could destroy crops, delay ships, or isolate entire regions. Without modern storage, refrigeration, or global supply chains, survival depended on planning, cooperation, and luck. Ancient Greece also stretched far beyond the modern borders of Greece. Greek-speaking communities existed across the Mediterranean and Black Sea. There were Greek cities in what is now southern Italy, Sicily, western Turkey, North Africa, and along distant coastlines. These colonies were not backwaters. They were active, wealthy, and deeply Greek in language and custom, while also shaped by local environments and neighbors. For someone living in one of these cities, home might mean a place hundreds of miles from the Greek mainland, yet culturally familiar. A merchant in southern Italy might feel more connected to Athens than to the inland tribes living just beyond the hills. The timeline of ancient Greece covers centuries. The focus stays mainly on the period from roughly 800 BCE to 300 BCE. That span includes the rise of city-states, the height of classical culture, and the early spread of Greek life under larger kingdoms. But daily life did not change overnight. Customs evolved slowly. Tools improved gradually. Many habits remained stable for generations. A farmer plowing a field in 400 BCE likely used techniques similar to those his great-grandfather had used. A woman weaving cloth learned the same motions her mother and grandmother had practiced. Children grew up hearing the same kinds of stories, singing the same songs, and learning the same expectations of behavior. At the same time, change was constant. Wars reshaped cities, new laws altered public life, trade brought new goods and ideas, political experiments succeeded and failed. People adapted, complained, resisted, and adjusted, just as people always have. Daily life was shaped by visibility. Ancient Greek cities were compact. Streets were narrow. Houses were close together. Sounds carried. Smells traveled. Privacy was limited. You knew your neighbor's routines. You heard arguments, celebrations, mourning, and work happening around you. Public life was unavoidable. Markets, courts, assemblies, and festivals brought people together constantly. Even those who stayed mostly at home were affected by public decisions. Taxes, wars, religious obligations, and social expectations reached into every household. The idea of citizenship mattered, but it applied to fewer people than we might expect. Only certain men qualified as full citizens in most cities. Women, foreigners, enslaved people, and children lived under the laws of the city without having full political rights. This shaped how people moved through public spaces, spoke in crowds, and imagined their futures. Yet even those without political power were deeply involved in daily life. Households depended on women's labor. Cities depended on non-citizen workers and traders. Enslaved people performed essential tasks in homes, workshops, and farms. Life functioned through cooperation and hierarchy at the same time. Ancient Greek life was intensely physical. Most work required the body. Walking was constant. Lifting, carrying, grinding, weaving, digging, rowing. These were normal parts of life. Even intellectual activities were physical, standing to speak, memorizing long texts, gesturing in debate, training the voice. The body aged faster. Injuries accumulated. Illness struck without warning. Childbirth was dangerous. Many children did not survive to adulthood. Those who did learned early how fragile life could be. Despite this, people found joy. They laughed, argued, celebrated, gossiped, sang, competed, flirted, and rested. Festivals broke the monotony of labor. Meals brought families together. Stories helped people make sense of suffering and luck. The idea of an ordinary day returns again and again. A person wakes up. They step into a space shaped by stone, wood, and earth. They smell smoke, bread, oil, and animals. They hear neighbors stirring. They think about work, food, obligations, and the gods. They move through a world that feels normal to them, even if it feels distant to us. The aim is not to admire ancient Greece from afar, but to feel how life unfolded from the inside, slow, demanding, social, uncertain, and deeply human. Daily existence begins with the most important unit of Greek life, the household, where courtyards, tools, and routines set the pace, one morning at a time. If ancient Greek life has a center, it's not the temple and it's not the marketplace. It's the home, the household, the oikos. Not just a building, but a whole living unit. People, property, tools, animals, stored food, debts, duties, and reputation, all packed into a space that has to function every day, in every season. From the street, an ancient Greek house can look almost intentionally unremarkable. A blank wall, a door, maybe a small window set high, more for light than for looking out. The outside is often plain, not because people lacked pride, but because the street is public and the home is private. In many cities, especially in dense neighborhoods, the street-facing wall is a kind of shield. It keeps strangers' eyes off the inner life of the household. It blocks wind and dust. It discourages thieves. You step through the doorway and the feeling changes. Instead of opening straight into a grand room, you're often funneled through a short passage, like a throat leading into the house's heart. That design isn't an accident. Many Greek houses, particularly in the classical period, are built with a single main entrance and an interior that opens inward, arranged around a courtyard. Archaeologists describe this as the single-entrance courtyard house, and it fits a practical goal: controlling movement in and out, keeping the household's rhythms less exposed, and separating visitors from the rest of the home when needed. Then you reach the courtyard, and that's where life actually happens. The courtyard is light, it's air, it's space to move. It's where smoke can rise without choking the whole house. It's where you can set down jars and baskets, spread out food to dry, handle messy work, and keep an eye on children. In a world where interior rooms can be dim even at noon, that open rectangle of sky is a daily relief. You can imagine the sounds. A clay pot being set down a little too hard. A broom sweeping gritty dust into a corner. A goat complaining from somewhere nearby. A child's sandals scuffing on packed earth. A neighbor's voice drifting over a wall, close enough that you can almost picture their hands moving as they talk. The house is not built for silence. It's built for function. Many floors are simple. Packed earth, beaten hard over years, sometimes finished with pebbles or plaster in wealthier homes. Walls can be mud brick on stone foundations, often plastered and whitewashed. Roofs vary. Some places and periods use thatch, some use tiles, and either way, rain is never fully defeated. Water finds the weak spots. A sudden storm can turn the courtyard into a shallow pan. In cities with better drainage, the water has somewhere to go. In other homes, it pools until someone pushes it toward the street. Storage is a constant concern. The household needs grain, oil, wine, dried legumes, maybe salted fish, maybe preserved fruit if you can manage it, plus tools, spare cloth, and anything you can't afford to replace. This is where pottery becomes the quiet hero of daily life. Large clay containers are everywhere. Amphorae, two-handled jars, move and store liquids and goods, and they're common enough to feel almost like a standard unit of everyday commerce. Then there are the big ones. The pithos. A pithos is not a jar you casually pick up and relocate. It's a storage vessel that can be so large it's partly sunk into the ground for stability and temperature control. Grain, oil, wine, whatever keeps a household alive, can disappear into a pithos and stay there, protected from moisture and pests, as well as clay can manage. If you want to understand what wealth looks like in an ancient Greek home, don't start with jewelry. Start with storage. The household that can keep reserves, extra grain, extra oil, extra wine, has something close to peace of mind. The household that can't is always one bad harvest, one illness, one broken tool away from crisis. Furniture is lighter than you might expect. Rooms aren't filled with heavy wardrobes and thick upholstered chairs. Many spaces are fairly bare by modern standards, partly because furniture is expensive, partly because you need room for work, and partly because people sit on stools, benches, or the floor without thinking much of it. A few wooden chairs, low tables, chests for valuables and cloth, sleeping pallets or simple beds, enough to live, not enough to clutter the space. Sleeping arrangements depend on wealth, family size, and the house's layout. In some homes, sleeping happens in upper rooms, especially if the ground floor is dominated by work and storage. Stairs can be steep and narrow. Upper spaces can be hot in summer and cold in winter, and they make the whole house feel layered. Public below, private above. Light is a daily limitation. Even with a courtyard, interior rooms can stay dim. Oil lamps exist, but light from a small lamp is gentle and weak. More a small circle of glow than a flood of brightness. Night work is possible but slower, and not everyone can afford to burn oil for long stretches. The day's main labor tries to fit into the daylight. Now, consider what rooms really mean. It's tempting to imagine a fixed blueprint. Kitchen here, bedroom there, men's room, women's room, each with a sign on the door. Real life is messier. Archaeologists and historians can identify certain rooms by features, like a special floor meant for dining couches, or a hearth, or drainage. But households use space flexibly. A room that stores grain today might hold guests during a festival. A space where cloth is folded might become a sleeping area when relatives visit. A courtyard might be a kitchen in summer and a workyard all year long. Still, some patterns show up often enough to feel familiar. One famous room is the andron. This is the men's dining room in many houses, often identifiable by a floor suited for couches arranged around the edges. It's the place for male guests, drinking parties, and formal dinners, especially among households that can afford that kind of hosting. It's also a room with a social job, keeping visitors in a controlled space, separate from the household's daily work, and separate, at least in ideal social terms, from women's spaces. The question of men's and women's areas is complicated. Some ancient texts talk about women's quarters, sometimes upstairs, sometimes adjacent, and there's long debate about how strictly homes were divided by gender in practice. Certain sources suggest separation. Other evidence suggests daily life forced overlap, because the household's work doesn't pause just because a visitor arrives. What can be said safely is that many Greek communities valued the idea of managing contact between household women and unrelated men, and house layouts often supported that goal, especially in cities like Athens where social expectations could be strict. Even without perfect separation, the home is full of invisible boundaries. Who is allowed to answer the door? Who can greet a visitor? Who is expected to stay out of sight? Who speaks and who stays quiet? These are learned habits, taught early, reinforced constantly, and shaped by status and local custom. Now bring your attention back to the courtyard and the household's work. Food preparation is not a neat, occasional task. It's a rhythm that repeats every day. Grain has to be turned into something edible. Legumes have to be soaked. Bread has to be planned. Oil has to be portioned carefully. And because nothing arrives in tidy packaging, there's always cleaning, sorting, storing, and protecting. A lot of cooking happens outdoors in the courtyard, especially in good weather. Smoke is easier to manage outside. Heat is easier to control. Space is easier. When cooking moves indoors, it often happens at a hearth or brazier, with some form of venting, sometimes a hole or opening designed to let smoke escape. Imagine the smell of a working hearth. Wood smoke. Oil warming. A pot that has been simmering. The faint, sour note of fermented wine. And always the underlying scent of a lived-in space. Clay, dust, sweat, damp plaster, and whatever the household keeps tucked in corners. Water is another daily obsession. Some homes have a well. Some rely on a cistern that collects rainwater. Some have access to clay pipes that bring water in, at least in certain places and periods. And many people depend on communal fountains, fountain houses, where water is collected and carried back home in jars. This means water is labor. It is weight. It is time. A jar filled with water does not feel like a simple household item once you've carried it through narrow streets under the sun. You learn to balance it. You learn to walk steadily. You learn what happens when someone bumps you and half your day's supply splashes into the dust. Water is used carefully. For cooking. For cleaning dishes. For washing hands. For rinsing cloth. For bathing when bathing happens. And when water is scarce, comfort becomes optional. Waste management exists, but it is uneven. Some neighborhoods have better drainage than others. Some houses are built with ways to move wastewater out. Channels, slopes, street drains. In other places, waste is handled more simply. Chamber pots, pits, and routines that keep the worst of it from pooling inside the house. Clean is not a fixed state. It's a constant effort. Now, consider the people who keep this whole system running. Households are not just parents and children. They can include grandparents, unmarried relatives, apprentices, and enslaved people, depending on wealth and circumstance. In many homes, enslaved labor is woven into daily function: cooking, carrying water, childcare, cleaning, and assisting in workshops connected to the house. That last part matters. Many ancient Greek homes are also workplaces. A small courtyard is not only a family space. It can be a place where cloth is dyed and hung, where pottery is stored for sale, where tools are repaired, where a small trade is practiced, quietly, steadily, day after day. Textile work is everywhere. If you want to picture the Greek household honestly, you should picture wool. Wool being cleaned. Wool being combed. Wool being spun into thread. Thread being woven into cloth. Cloth being repaired and folded and stored. Weaving is not a hobby. It is a necessity. Clothing wears out. Blankets fray. Sandals break. And new fabric is expensive. Households that produce textiles are protecting themselves from the cost of buying cloth, and households that sell textiles are turning domestic labor into income. You can see the tools in the mind. The loom standing in a room near light, weights hanging from warp threads, a basket of spindles, a pile of cleaned fleece waiting for hands that never seem to rest. Daily life is also shaped by surveillance, not in the modern sense of cameras, but in the sense of constant awareness. Someone is always watching. A neighbor sees who comes to your door. A relative notices if supplies seem low. A visitor reads your household's order and discipline from small details. A tidy courtyard suggests control. A cracked jar suggests financial strain. A child with dirty hands suggests exhaustion. A well-kept lamp suggests someone can afford oil. Even the doorway matters. In a world where many houses have one main entrance, the door is not just wood. It is the boundary between public and private. It is the point where rumor enters. It is where announcements arrive. It is where a creditor might stand. It is where a messenger's voice can change the household's week. Inside, life is organized around small, repeated acts. Sweeping, sorting, grinding, washing, storing, mending, feeding. These are not dramatic acts, but they are survival. And they are also identity. The household is where you learn what is expected of you, how to speak, how to sit, how to show respect, how to hide fear, how to work without being asked, how to endure when the day is long and the food is plain. If you stand quietly in that courtyard for a moment, you can sense the household's pulse, the way the morning begins with movement. The way the heat presses down at midday and tasks shift toward shade. The way evening light turns softer and people gather closer. The way the jars, the tools, the walls, and the rooms hold the memory of every day that came before. The home is not glamorous. It is not a marble stage. It is clay, smoke, water, and work. And for most people in the Greek world, it is the place where life is decided, quietly, repeatedly, one ordinary day after another. Food in the ancient Greek world is not a hobby, it's not entertainment. For most households, it's a constant math problem: how to turn land, labor, and a small set of reliable crops into enough calories to keep everyone moving. The picture gets romanticized sometimes: olive groves glowing in the sun, grapes hanging heavy, bread cooling on a clean table. The real version is simpler. Food is effort. Food is planning. Food is the quiet worry of whether the jars will last until the next harvest. In many places, the backbone of the diet is grain. Not fluffy white bread, not soft rolls. Grain in the Greek world often means barley. Barley is tough, dependable, and more willing than wheat to survive harsh conditions. It becomes bread, porridge, and a kind of dense cake that can travel well. Wheat exists too, and wheat bread is prized, but it's not always the everyday default. Imagine what it takes to make that bread. First, the grain has to be stored safely, kept dry, kept from mold, kept from insects and rats. Then it has to be measured out, day by day, because the household can't eat tomorrow's grain today. Grinding is one of the most repeated acts in a home. A hand mill, a grinding stone, a rhythm that can take a long time, turning hard kernels into usable flour. It's not the kind of task that feels dramatic, but it shapes a day. It shapes arms, it shapes posture, it shapes hands. Once the flour is ready, dough is mixed with water, sometimes with a little salt, and then baked. In some homes, baking happens in a simple hearth setup. In others, there are clay ovens. Sometimes bread is cooked on hot stones or under a domed cover with coals piled on top. The methods vary by region and wealth, but the goal is the same: create something dense, durable, and filling. Bread is often served with something. Not a huge spread, not a dozen side dishes. Usually something salty, something oily, something that makes the grain easier to swallow and a little less monotonous. That's where olives come in. Olives are not just a snack, they're a foundation. Olives can be eaten, but their deeper power is oil. Olive oil becomes cooking fat, flavor, light for lamps, and sometimes medicine. It also becomes trade. A household that produces oil has a product with real value. But producing oil is labor. Harvesting olives means long days of picking, beating branches, gathering fallen fruit, and then pressing. Pressing can be done with simple household methods, or with larger community presses that can handle more volume. Either way, the work is seasonal, intense, and messy. And oil must be protected, stored in jars, kept away from heat, portioned carefully. If it runs out, meals become blander and life becomes harder. Alongside grain and oil, there are legumes, lentils, chickpeas, beans. They matter because they bring protein and they store well. They also take time. Many have to be soaked, many simmer for a long time, and fuel is not infinite. Fuel is another hidden cost of eating. Wood must be gathered or bought. Charcoal can be used. In cities, fuel can be expensive enough that cooking becomes strategic. One pot simmering while other tasks happen. One fire that tries to do multiple jobs. Vegetables exist in the diet too, but they aren't always the star. Onions, garlic, greens, herbs. Whatever grows in gardens, whatever can be bought at market, whatever survives in your region. Fruit appears when it's in season. Figs, grapes, apples in some places, pomegranates. But fruit is not a reliable year-round comfort. It comes and goes, and when it's gone, it's gone. Then there's fish. If you live near the coast, fish can be common. If you live inland, it becomes something you might see dried or salted, or you might not see it much at all unless you have money. Fresh fish is quick food. It doesn't need long cooking. It doesn't need elaborate preparation. But it needs access, a port, a market, a fisher with a net and a boat. Salted fish travels better. It becomes a trade item. It becomes a way to bring a taste of the sea inland. It is also very salty, which means it makes bread and water feel less like punishment. Meat is where modern imagination often goes wrong. Most people are not eating large portions of meat every day. Animals are valuable while alive. Goats and sheep give milk. Cattle are costly. Chickens produce eggs. A household doesn't slaughter casually. Meat shows up more often at festivals and sacrifices, where animals are killed in a public, religious context and portions are distributed. That's not the same as constant meat consumption. For many people, a major feast with real meat is an event, not a routine. Dairy exists, but it's not the modern refrigerator version. Milk spoils quickly, so milk becomes cheese. Cheese stores. Cheese travels. Cheese can turn bread into a real meal. Honey plays the role sugar will play later. It sweetens. It preserves. It makes simple food feel special. But honey isn't cheap for everyone, and it depends on beekeeping and luck. Now picture the actual moment of eating. A household meal is not always a formal table gathering. It can be people eating in shifts. It can be people eating quickly between tasks. It can be bread dipped in oil shared from a common plate. It can be a bowl of lentils that smells faintly of smoke. It can be a handful of figs eaten standing up. The wealthy can afford different textures and more variety. More fish. More wheat bread. More meat. Better wine. Imported spices. But even in a wealthy home, food is still tied to seasons and supply. And even in a poor home, there are moments when food becomes celebration. Festivals reshape the menu. Not every day is survival mode. Certain days are built for community. Processions, sacrifices, communal meals. These are times when people eat differently, when the scent of roasting meat fills streets, and when the household's usual strict portioning loosens for a moment. Those moments matter. They are relief. They are social glue. They are the kind of memory that carries people through a hard month. Now, wine. Wine is everywhere in the Greek world, but it's not always consumed the way modern people imagine. Wine is often diluted with water. Drinking wine straight can be seen as crude or reckless, depending on context. Wine can be a daily drink, but it's also a cultural object, something that marks hospitality, status, and social rhythm. Wine is also storage and labor. Grapes must be harvested, pressed, fermented, stored in jars, watched carefully. A bad batch is not just disappointing, it's a loss of value. And water matters again here. Clean water is not guaranteed everywhere. Safe water can depend on wells, cisterns, and springs. Diluting wine can also be a practical choice, stretching supply and making a drink that feels safer or at least more stable than certain sources. For households, the day's eating can follow a loose pattern. A small morning bite, often bread. A midday meal that keeps you going. An evening meal that feels like the real gathering when work slows and people can sit. But the pattern bends with labor. A farmer during harvest eats when there is time. A sailor eats when the sea allows. A potter eats between firing and selling. A household feeding small children adjusts constantly. There is also hunger. It doesn't have to be famine to shape life. It can be thin food. It can be smaller portions. It can be days where lentils replace everything else. It can be the quiet choice to water down a stew more than usual. It can be the feeling of counting what's left. People learn how to live with that. They learn which weeds are edible. They learn how to stretch oil. They learn how to make barley satisfying. They learn to save the best foods for the days that matter socially. And through all of it, the meal is never only about nutrition. It is a social act. Offering bread to a guest is not a small gesture. It is a declaration, you are safe here for now. Sharing wine is not just drinking, it is participation. Refusing food can be insult. Taking too much can be shame. Even the simplest meal carries rules. Where you sit, who eats first, who serves, who speaks, who stays quiet. In the ancient Greek world, food is not just in the bowl, it is in the relationships around the bowl. And when you understand that, grain, oil, legumes, seasonal fruit, occasional fish, rare meat, careful wine, you start to feel the daily pressure that sits behind every household decision. Calories are time. Calories are labor. Calories are survival. And a good meal, even a plain one, can feel like a small victory. Work in the ancient Greek world starts before anyone calls it work. It starts with the body waking up stiff. It starts with hands already reaching for tasks, because the household depends on movement. In a place where most people live close to the edge of enough, labor is not optional, it's not self-expression. It's the daily engine that keeps the jars filled, the roof patched, the children fed, and the household's reputation intact. For the majority of people, the baseline occupation is farming. Even if you live in a town, your family's survival might still be tied to fields or groves outside the walls. Many households have at least some connection to land, either owning a small plot, renting it, working it for someone else, or doing seasonal labor when extra hands are needed. The landscape shapes the job. Greece is not endless flat farmland. It's hills, rocky soil, narrow valleys, and coastal strips. That means agriculture is often small-scale and patchwork. You work the land you can. You manage terraces. You adapt to what grows. The main trio, grain, olives, and grapes, drives the year. Grain requires planting, weeding, guarding, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, and storage. Olives require long-term patience. Trees don't reward you instantly. They demand care over years, and then they demand intense seasonal labor when harvest time arrives. Grapes demand their own cycle: pruning, tending, harvesting, pressing, fermentation, storage. These are not neat jobs that fit into 8-hour shifts. They're seasonal waves that can swallow entire weeks. A day in the fields is physical and repetitive. You walk to the land. You carry tools. You bend and lift. You cut and gather. You haul what you've collected. If you're threshing, you beat grain to free it from the stalk. If you're winnowing, you throw it into the air to let wind separate edible grain from chaff. Dust gets into the mouth. Sun burns the back of the neck. Small cuts add up. And then you carry the results back to a place where it still needs work. Even after harvest, grain is not instantly food. It becomes stored grain. Stored grain becomes ground grain. Ground grain becomes bread. The work doesn't end when you stop walking. And yet, not everyone is a farmer. Cities and towns hum with crafts. Some crafts look ordinary: shoemaking, carpentry, basket weaving. Some look like specialized skill: pottery, metalworking, shipbuilding. Some look like domestic labor turned into product: spinning and weaving textiles. In many cases, the home and the workshop overlap. You might live in the same space where you produce goods. You might store your raw materials under the same roof where your children sleep. A potter's household has its own rhythm. Clay has to be collected and cleaned. It has to be kneaded until it behaves, shaped on a wheel or by hand, dried carefully, fired in a kiln, painted or glazed, depending on the style, then carried to market and sold. Each step is vulnerable. A pot cracks. A firing goes wrong. A batch comes out warped. That's not just a ruined object. It's wasted time, wasted fuel, wasted labor. A metalworker deals with different risks. Fire, heat, smoke, burns. A mistake can injure you. A mistake can ruin expensive material. And in a world where metal means tools, weapons, and status objects, the demand can be steady, but so can the pressure. Shipbuilders and sailors live with risk as part of the job. Wood has to be chosen. Parts have to fit. Rope has to be strong. A boat is only as safe as its weakest joint. And once it leaves the harbor, everything depends on weather, skill, and luck. Now imagine the market. The agora. It's often described as a civic space, and it is. But as a lived place, it's a loud, crowded, constantly shifting mix of commerce and social life. You hear bargaining. You hear arguments. You hear someone calling out prices. You smell fish. You smell olives. You smell sweat. You smell smoke drifting in from cooking fires. You see baskets. You see jars. You see animals being led through the crowd. And you see people watching each other. The market is not only for buying, it's for being seen. It's for checking who's doing well, who looks stressed, who's dressing better than last month, who's trying to sell something that doesn't look as fresh as they claim. If you want to understand social pressure, you can watch the market. Someone with money can buy time. Someone without money spends time searching for a better price. Someone with influence can buy on credit. Someone without influence pays up front or does without. Money exists in coins, but not everyone handles a lot of it. Many transactions still rely on barter, credit, or relationships. A familiar seller might extend trust. A stranger might demand immediate payment. If your household has a reputation for paying late, people remember. If your household is known to be honest, that reputation becomes its own kind of currency. Wages exist too. Day laborers might be hired for harvest. Builders might be paid for construction. Rowers and sailors might earn pay on voyages. But work is often irregular, especially for the poor. One week might be full, another week might be empty. Debt becomes a shadow. If crops fail, debt grows. If a family member gets sick, debt grows. If a tool breaks, debt grows. And debt can turn life into a slow tightening. Selling possessions, reducing meals, taking on harsher work. Depending on local laws and practices, debt can even lead to loss of freedom or forced labor. And that reality makes money feel personal, not abstract. There's also the world beyond the local market. Trade runs through the Greek world like a bloodstream. Olive oil and wine move in jars. Pottery moves in stacks. Timber moves from places with forests to places that need ships. Grain moves from regions that can produce surplus to regions that can't. Metals move. Dyes move. Spices move. And with goods come ideas, rumors, styles, and news. A harbor city feels different from an inland village. In a port, you see more foreigners. You hear more languages. You see unfamiliar clothing. You smell different food. You hear different music. Port life brings opportunity, but also instability. Prices can rise suddenly if ships don't arrive. Food can become scarce. A storm can wipe out a season's expected profit. A pirate attack can ruin a merchant. And for sailors, danger is not theoretical. It's wind and waves and the hard truth that the sea does not negotiate. Even within a city, work divides people into patterns. Some people work in the open. Vendors, carriers, fishermen, builders. Others work behind doors. Weavers, potters, metal workers. And some work in service roles that make daily life smoother for others, especially in households with more resources. Carrying water, grinding grain, cleaning, cooking, managing supplies. Those tasks can be done by family members, hired help, or enslaved labor, depending on the household. And then there's work that is hard to see until you watch closely. The work of keeping accounts. The work of remembering who owes whom. The work of managing storage. The work of negotiating marriages and alliances. The work of maintaining honor. These forms of labor shape survival just as much as planting grain. Work also shapes identity. A craft can define a family. A trade can define a reputation. A successful harvest can raise status. A failed harvest can bring shame. And for a citizen man in certain cities, there's a tension. Some people believe that the best life is not constant manual labor, but a life with enough property to participate in public affairs. That ideal doesn't erase work. It simply means work gets pushed onto others: family, hired hands, enslaved people, tenants. For many households, that ideal is a distant fantasy. Most people work because they must. And when they stop, the household feels it immediately. The ancient Greek world runs on muscle, routine, and relationship. Coins help. Markets help. Trade helps. But the real foundation is labor, performed day after day, season after season, often without praise, and often without rest. If you listen closely, you can hear it. The scrape of a shovel, the tap of a hammer, the creak of a cart, the murmur of bargaining, the steady grind of stone on grain. That sound is daily life, turning effort into survival, one task at a time. In the ancient Greek world, daily life is shaped by a question that sits under almost every interaction. Who are you allowed to be here? Not who you are inside, not your personality, not your dreams. Your status, your legal category, your family, your freedom, your name, spoken in the right place with the right father attached to it. Because in many Greek cities, rights are not universal, they are granted. They are guarded, they are defended like property. And once you understand how the social layers work, the rest of life becomes clearer. Who stands confidently in public, who keeps their eyes down, who speaks first, who steps aside, and who lives with the knowledge that one mistake can be fatal. Start with the word that matters most in many cities: citizen. A citizen is not simply someone who lives there. A citizen is a man recognized by the city as belonging to it, usually through birth to citizen parents. Citizenship comes with participation, rights to speak in assemblies, serve on juries, hold certain offices, own land in specific contexts, and be protected under civic law in ways others are not. Citizenship is also a burden. The citizen is expected to serve. Serve in war. Serve in the courts. Serve in public duties. Pay contributions when required. And above all, protect the city's honor and stability. That doesn't mean citizens live comfortably. Many citizen households are poor. Many citizens work with their hands. Many citizens live in cramped houses with thin food and constant worry. But the identity matters. It changes how you can move through the world. In a crowded street, a citizen can call on the city's law with more confidence. In a dispute, a citizen has a stronger footing. When speaking, a citizen expects to be heard. Now, consider those who live in the same city but are not citizens. Foreign residents. visitors, migrants, merchants, craft workers, people who have chosen or been forced to build a life in a place that will never fully claim them. In some cities, these residents can be essential. Ports and markets need outsiders. Skilled crafts are often practiced by people who moved in. Trade relies on networks that cross city boundaries. And yet, foreign residents commonly face restrictions. Extra taxes, limits on property ownership, requirements to have a local sponsor, a social ceiling that never disappears. They can become wealthy. They can become respected. But they remain, in legal terms, something like guests who pay rent for the privilege of staying. That status shapes daily behavior. It changes how you speak in public. It changes how you handle conflict. It changes who you marry. It changes what you expect your children to be. And then there are the people at the bottom of stability. The poor. Not as a single group, but as a wide range of households living with thin margins. Some have land, but not enough. Some have a trade, but irregular income. Some depend on day labor. Some depend on the kindness of relatives. Some depend on loans. And some depend on luck. Poverty in the ancient Greek world is not always dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be normal. It can look like worn sandals and a patched cloak. It can look like barley and lentils, again. It can look like putting off repairs because the roof can survive one more season. It can look like choosing not to go to a festival because you can't spare the food. It can look like sending a child to work earlier than you hoped. Poverty is also vulnerability. Illness is not just pain, it is economic disaster. An injury isn't just an inconvenience, it can mean losing the harvest. A failed voyage isn't just lost profit, it can mean debt that tightens for years. A bad year can pull a household from managing to ruin faster than anyone wants to admit. The wealthy, in contrast, live in a different atmosphere. They have reserves. They have storage. They have influence. They can buy time. They can hire labor. They can arrange connections. They can give gifts that turn into favors. Wealth is not only comfort, it is protection. It shields you from shortages. It turns legal trouble into something negotiable. It allows your household to recover after misfortune instead of collapsing. But wealth also brings obligations. In certain cities, wealthy citizens can be expected to fund public expenses, religious festivals, ships, performances, building projects. That can be a source of pride, but it is also pressure. Reputation matters. If you have money, the city notices what you do with it. Now, the hardest layer to face directly, slavery. Enslaved people are not a small footnote in Greek daily life. In many places, they are woven into the household's function and the city's economy. Enslavement comes through several paths: war, piracy, kidnapping, sale of humans across markets, birth into enslaved status, debt and legal punishments in certain contexts. And once someone is enslaved, their body becomes property under the law. That reality shapes everything. It shapes speech. It shapes movement. It shapes fear. It shapes the smallest choices. Enslaved labor appears in households: cooking, cleaning, carrying water, childcare, running errands, assisting in a workshop. Enslaved labor also appears in agriculture. And in some of the worst conditions, mines, quarries, and other forms of harsh extraction. The lived experience of an enslaved person depends on where they are, what labor they're forced to do, and how they're treated by their owner. But the constant is the lack of freedom. No legal control over your own time. No guaranteed family stability. No protection from sale. No right to refuse. Even in a household where the work is lighter, the status is still a cage. And enslaved people are also used as a social tool. Owning slaves signals wealth. Using enslaved labor frees citizen men from certain tasks. It supports the idea that some people are meant for public life while others are meant for service. That idea becomes a cultural habit, reinforced until it feels natural to those who benefit from it. Different Greek societies handle these layers differently. Some cities lean heavily on enslaved labor and workshops. Some are more agricultural. Some have unique systems tied to conquest and control. Sparta is often treated as its own category. In Sparta, the Helots, subjugated populations tied to the land, form a huge labor base that supports the Spartan citizen class. The system is rigid and violent, built on domination and fear, with constant tension beneath the surface. That doesn't mean other Greek cities are gentle. It means Sparta's structure makes the contrast easy to see. Now, step back and look at how these layers feel on an ordinary day. You walk through the market. A citizen speaks loudly. A foreign resident listens more carefully. A poor laborer watches prices with worry. An enslaved person carries a load through the crowd, eyes scanning for the path of least trouble. These layers show up in clothing. Not always in a uniform way, but in quality and condition. A clean, well-draped cloak suggests a household with means. A patched garment suggests long use. Footwear, whether someone has sandals in good repair or none at all, can signal comfort or hardship. The layers show up in posture. Who takes space? Who moves to the side? Who meets the gaze? Who keeps their head down? They show up in risk. If a citizen is insulted, he has options. If a non-citizen is insulted, the options narrow. If an enslaved person is insulted, the insult may be the least of the danger. The layers show up in the home. Who eats first? Who serves? Who sleeps where? Who has the right to leave the house freely? Who must ask? They show up in festivals. Who sits close? Who stands in the back? Who participates? Who watches? And they show up in the future. A citizen child grows up with the expectation of belonging. A foreign residence child grows up with the knowledge that belonging has limits. A poor child grows up with the pressure to contribute early. An enslaved child grows up inside a reality where choice is a luxury. This is not a society made of one shared experience. It is a society made of layers. And those layers are not abstract. They are lived every day in the smallest details. How a person speaks, where they walk, what they carry, what they dare to hope for. If you want to feel ancient Greek life as it was, you have to feel those layers, because they decide what a day can be and what a day can never become. A Greek city can look like a world built for men. The public spaces, the assembly, the courts, the gymnasium, the open debates, are dominated by male voices and male movement. But the daily engine of life, the part that keeps people fed, clothed, raised, and remembered, runs through the household. And inside that household, women's labor and family structure carry enormous weight. What that looks like depends on the city, the era, and the household's status. It can look like a woman managing supplies with sharp precision. It can look like constant textile work. It can look like pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery happening with little comfort. It can look like raising children while also keeping the house functioning. And for the wealthy, it can also look like responsibility wrapped in constraint, power inside the household, and limited visibility outside it. Marriage is a central institution, not always romantic, often strategic. Marriage ties households together. It creates legitimate heirs. It organizes property and inheritance. It shapes alliances and reputation. In many places, marriages are arranged by families. A father, a guardian, or male relatives negotiate terms. A dowry may be involved, property or wealth, transferred with the bride, that helps secure her position and supports the household she enters. The dowry is not just a gift, it's leverage. It can protect a woman if the marriage turns hostile. It can be reclaimed under certain conditions. It also signals status. A household that can provide a substantial dowry is announcing its strength. A household that can't is limited in options. Age gaps are common. Men often marry later, after establishing stability. Women can marry younger. That reality is not just a social preference, it's tied to the urgent goal of producing heirs. Because the household is a line, a family name, a property chain, a future that depends on sons surviving long enough to inherit. Childbirth is one of the most dangerous, ordinary events in life. Not dramatic the way a battle is dramatic. Dangerous in a quieter, more frequent way. There is pain. There is risk of infection. There is bleeding. There are complications that cannot be fixed. There are mothers who do not survive. There are infants who do not survive. And because of that, family life is often shaped by a kind of practical grief. People do not always speak about it openly, but they live with it. They plan around it. They expect it enough that it becomes part of the background. A newborn is welcomed, but not always with the assumption that the future is guaranteed. Inside the household, a woman's daily labor can be constant. Water, food, cloth, cleaning, supervision, child care, religious duties, negotiating small household relationships. And if enslaved people are present, household women often manage them, assigning work, monitoring supplies, maintaining order. That management is not always gentle. It is power within a constrained sphere. And it can be shaped by stress, insecurity, and the fear of losing control. Textiles deserve special attention. Cloth is life. Clothing is protection. Blankets are warmth. Sheets are comfort. And fabric is expensive. Producing cloth is an ongoing household project. Spinning thread from wool or flax. Weaving thread into fabric. Mending. Patching. Turning old cloth into new uses. This work can fill hours every day. It is also one of the ways a household measures competence. A well-run home produces. It doesn't waste. It doesn't fall behind. Household reputation can hinge on what visitors see. A clean courtyard. Organized storage. Children who behave. Cloth folded neatly. A lamp that has oil. Even if the household is poor, the effort to maintain order is judged. Family structure is also shaped by law. In many cities, women are under the authority of a male guardian, often a father, husband, or closest male relative. That guardian can control legal decisions, marriage arrangements, property management, court representation. This does not mean women have no agency. It means their agency operates through household networks, persuasion, negotiation, and influence inside the home. A capable woman can shape decisions. She can manage resources. She can advise. She can build alliances with relatives. She can protect children's interests. But the legal framing often limits what she can do openly. Public visibility varies. In some cities and social contexts, women's movement in public is expected to be limited. Not absent, but controlled. Public appearances might center on religious festivals, funerals, and certain household tasks. Markets can be visited. Fountain houses can be visited. But social expectations about modesty and reputation can make public life feel like walking through a field of judgment. A single rumor can matter. A single accusation can damage a household. So a household can become cautious. It can become guarded. And that caution shapes how women dress, move, and speak outside. Sparta is often held up as a contrast. Spartan women in many accounts have more visible public presence and more involvement in managing property, partly because Spartan men are heavily oriented toward military life. Physical training for Spartan girls is more emphasized. Inheritance patterns can differ, and the social atmosphere is not the same as Athens. But the contrast should not be turned into a fairy tale. Sparta is still built on hierarchy and domination. It is still dependent on a labor base that is controlled violently. Spartan women's relative visibility exists inside that structure. The household is also where children learn the world. Before formal schooling, children learn through imitation. They learn what food is normal. They learn what work is expected. They learn who speaks and who serves. They learn what is shameful and what is praised. Mothers, grandmothers, and household women shape that learning. So do fathers and male relatives. So do enslaved caretakers in households where they exist. Discipline varies. Some households are strict. Some are affectionate. Some are both. But the goal is consistent. Produce a person who fits the city's expectations. Family life also includes older generations. Grandparents can live within the household. Elderly relatives can be supported. Or, in poorer households, care can become a burden that strains resources. There is no retirement system. Age can mean dependence. So a household's ability to care for elders is another marker of stability. Inheritance is a constant background concern. Property, land, tools, and household goods have to move to someone. Without clear heirs, a household can fracture. Adoption can occur. Guardianship becomes important. Marriages can be arranged to keep property within a family line. That makes children not only beloved, but crucial. And it makes family conflict more than personal. It becomes economic. Inside all of this, affection still exists. People grieve. People celebrate. People protect each other. Children are hugged. Parents worry. Siblings fight and reconcile. A household can be harsh and loving at the same time. What changes in the ancient Greek setting is how much of life is contained inside that household unit. If the oikos fails, the person falls. If the oikos holds, the person survives. And in the center of that system, often unseen from the street, women's labor and family organization quietly decide whether life is stable or constantly breaking. It is the kind of power that doesn't get carved into statues. But it is power all the same. Childhood in the ancient Greek world begins inside the household, surrounded by adults who are working, worrying, and watching. A child learns early that life is not built around them. Life is built around survival. So childhood is threaded with responsibility sooner than many modern people expect. That doesn't mean there is no affection. Parents and relatives care. People laugh at children's mistakes. Older siblings carry younger ones. But affection exists inside a world that demands usefulness. A small child is constantly underfoot. They follow a mother, a grandmother, a caretaker, an older sibling. They watch hands measure grain. They watch cloth become thread. They watch water being carried in heavy jars. They watch a father leave for work or for public duties. And they absorb rules without anyone needing to announce them. Who speaks first? Who sits where? Who touches what? What is inside and what is outside? What is shameful? What is honorable? Toys exist. Not shiny plastic piles, but small objects that fit into household life. Little clay animals, rattles, small balls, simple dolls. Often handmade, often repaired, often passed down. Games happen in courtyards and streets. Children chase. They throw stones. They wrestle. They imitate adults. They practice being the kind of person the city expects. Chores begin early. A child might be asked to fetch something, to sweep, to mind a younger sibling, to help with sorting food, to carry messages inside a neighborhood. The tasks are small at first, but the point is training. The household is preparing a future worker. Discipline is part of that preparation. Methods vary by family. Some households use stern voices and quick punishment. Some rely more on shame and reputation. Some use affection and persuasion. But the goal is similar: create self-control. Not because self-control is a nice virtue, but because in a crowded city, a person without control can damage the whole family. A loud child can be noticed. A child who steals can shame the household. A child who disrespects elders can stain a family name. So behavior becomes a form of security. Now, education. Education is not universal. It depends on wealth. It depends on status. It depends on local custom. Some children learn to read and write. Some do not. Some learn only enough to handle basic transactions. Some grow up nearly illiterate, but highly skilled with their hands. For many boys in cities like Athens, formal schooling can begin around age 7, if the family can afford it. A child might be escorted by a household slave or guardian figure. He learns letters. He learns to read and recite poetry. He learns basic arithmetic. He learns to sing, play an instrument, and understand rhythm and harmony. These are not treated as luxury arts. Music and poetry are training. They shape memory. They shape speech. They shape a sense of order. A person who can recite and speak well has power later. Words matter in Greek public life. A man might defend himself in court. He might argue in an assembly. He might negotiate contracts. A trained voice can change a life. Education also happens in the gymnasium. Physical training is cultural. Running, wrestling, throwing, jumping. Not only to build strength, but to build discipline and confidence. The gymnasium is a place of sweat and dust. It is also a place of observation. People watch bodies. They measure effort. They judge character. And in some cities, older men mingle with younger ones, shaping mentorship and influence. For poorer families, education can look different. A boy might be sent to learn a trade. A girl might be kept inside household work from the beginning. Learning happens through apprenticeship. A craftsperson teaches by correction. A mistake is shown, not explained. Hands learn the truth faster than words. Girls' education varies widely. In many places, girls learn household skills: spinning, weaving, cooking, managing supplies, caring for younger children. Some girls in wealthier households may learn to read. Some may learn music. But the household usually prioritizes skills that keep the home functioning. Reputation is also a form of education. A girl learns how to move, how to speak, how to dress, and how to avoid gossip. A boy learns how to stand, how to answer, how to show respect, and how to defend honor. Education is not only knowledge, it is social shaping. And then there is the harsh reality of mortality. Not every child reaches adulthood. Sickness can come suddenly. Infection can take a child fast. Accidents happen. A fall, a burn, a fever. Families love children while also living with uncertainty. That uncertainty can make people cautious, or it can make them hold their children tighter. Both can be true. Coming of age is not a single birthday. It is a gradual shift in expectation. A boy begins to be treated as someone who will soon carry public responsibilities. He is expected to control himself. He is expected to learn when to speak and when to keep silent. He is expected to be ready for military training depending on the city. A girl begins to be treated as someone whose future is marriage and household management. She is expected to understand modesty, duty, and the social weight of reputation. In Sparta, childhood is often described in more extreme terms. Training is more militarized. Hardness is praised. Endurance is demanded. Girls are trained physically more than in many other Greek communities. But even there, childhood is not a simple story of toughness. It is a system designed to produce a particular kind of adult within a rigid society. For children everywhere in the Greek world, the most consistent teacher is daily life. The feel of heat, the weight of water, the smell of smoke, the sound of bargaining, the pressure of being watched. Childhood is not separate from the adult world. It is training inside it. And by the time a child becomes a young adult, they have already absorbed the most important lesson. Life is held together by routine, reputation, and work, and the city expects you to fit into that structure without breaking it. In many ancient Greek cities, politics is not something you watch from a distance. It isn't a headline. It isn't a quiet checkbox. It is something you walk to. It is something you stand in. It is something you sweat through. And even if you never speak, the decisions made in public spaces land directly on your household. Taxes, war, grain supply, religious obligations, building projects, punishments, alliances, and the constant question of who belongs. The most famous example is Athens, because Athens leaves behind a lot of records, and because its democratic system becomes a permanent point of reference. But Athens is not the whole Greek world. Some cities are oligarchies, run by a smaller group of powerful families. Some balance councils and assemblies. Some shift over time: tyranny, reform, faction, collapse, renewal. Sparta has its own structure, with kings, elders, and officials that create a different feel. Still, across many cities, one truth stays steady: public life is physical. It pulls people out of their homes and into shared spaces. It turns neighbors into judges. It turns arguments into law. And it can turn a normal day into a day that changes everything. Start with the idea of the polis. A polis is a city-state, but it is also a community with an identity. It has laws, traditions, boundaries, sanctuaries, and a sense of who we are. A person can live inside the polis without being a citizen. But the polis is built around the citizen body, adult men in many places, who have the legal right to participate and the obligation to defend the community. That participation is not abstract. If you want a voice, you show up. In Athens, the assembly is a gathering of citizens where decisions are debated and voted. Imagine what that feels like. You leave your house early. You walk through streets that are already busy, vendors setting out goods, people carrying water, children weaving between legs, animals complaining as they're led along. You move toward a place where the crowd thickens. A hill, a slope, a wide open space where thousands of men can gather. Some arrive confident, already talking. Some arrive quiet, standing at the edge. Some arrive because they care. Some arrive because they are paid to attend, and the coin matters. And some arrive because public pressure matters, because being seen as a participant protects your status. There is noise. Not a polished, respectful silence. Real noise. Voices overlapping. Arguments already starting. People calling out. People laughing. People getting irritated. The crowd is not made of trained politicians. It is made of citizens with jobs, grievances, pride, and impatience. And because the crowd is made of ordinary people, the stakes feel personal. A vote on war is not theoretical. It might mean your son marching. It might mean your business disrupted. It might mean your harvest threatened. A vote on taxes is not about spreadsheets. It is about whether your household eats as usual. A vote on grain supply is not an economic debate. It is about hunger. Athens developed systems to manage this kind of crowd. Officials help set agendas. A council prepares matters. Procedures shape who speaks and in what order. And the city can even push people toward attendance. There are stories of public slaves moving through the marketplace with a rope stained red, herding citizens toward the meeting space, with fines for those who try too hard to avoid the civic burden. That image is sharp because it's honest. Participation is praised, but it is also enforced. A city that runs on citizen decision-making needs citizens present. So the polis applies pressure, not always with violence, often with embarrassment, fines, and the simple power of being watched. Then the speaking begins. Public speaking in Athens is not a niche skill. It is a form of survival. A man with a strong voice can sway decisions. A man with poor delivery can be ignored. And because the assembly can decide enormous things, persuasion becomes a weapon. The most effective speakers learn the crowd. They learn what scares people. They learn what makes people proud. They learn which words trigger anger. They learn how to frame a choice so that voting against them feels like voting against the city. In that environment, the boundary between civic virtue and manipulation can feel thin. And in the crowd, you can see different motivations living side by side. Some men care deeply about principle. Some want revenge. Some want profit. Some want status. Some simply want stability. This is one of the reasons ancient Greek politics can feel intense. It is not distant. It is emotional. It runs through reputation. If you support the wrong proposal, people remember. If you speak and fail, people remember. If you accuse someone and lose, people remember. Public memory is a kind of shadow that follows you home. Now, behind the assembly, there are structures that keep the city functioning day by day. In Athens, the Council of 500, the Boulé, handles much of the daily administration. Members are chosen by lot in many periods, and they serve for limited time. The point of selection by lot is to spread power and reduce the chance that a small group will capture the system. It also means that ordinary citizens can find themselves pulled into governance. Imagine what that looks like in practice. A man who spent yesterday in a workshop or in the fields or carrying goods at the port now spends today inside official buildings. He listens to petitions. He deals with routine matters. He helps shape what the assembly will vote on. He meets ambassadors. He handles finance details. And he does it while still being someone's neighbor, someone's cousin, someone's debtor. This creates a strange, intimate form of government. Your leaders are not distant. They are the men you pass in the street. You can see the exhaustion on their faces. You can also see the pride. Serving the city is status. Even when it is inconvenient, it can feel like proof that you matter. There are also magistrates, officials with specific duties. Some oversee markets. Some oversee weights and measures. Some oversee roads. Some oversee religious matters. Some oversee military needs. Some oversee finances. And because there is no massive bureaucratic state, these roles can be unusually personal. If grain prices rise, the officials responsible for market regulation become visible targets. If a road is a mess, people complain to someone by name. If a festival goes wrong, people blame specific organizers. In this world, official responsibility is not hidden behind institutions. It has a face. And a face can be praised or punished. Law brings this even closer. Modern people often imagine law as a professional system, police investigating, lawyers arguing, judges ruling, and a quiet process that happens behind official doors. In classical Athens, the courts can be public, crowded, and deeply social. Large juries are common. Cases are heard by groups of citizens who serve as jurors, often selected by lot. There are no professional judges in the modern sense guiding every case. And there is not always a professional prosecutor. People bring cases themselves. They speak for themselves. They bring witnesses. They appeal to law, but they also appeal to emotion. They tell stories. They frame their opponent as dangerous to the city. They praise their own character. They attack the other person's reputation. If you can picture a court day, it looks less like a quiet courtroom and more like a civic spectacle. Men gather early. They cluster in groups, discussing cases. They trade opinions. They watch who is arriving. They remember who has been in trouble before. The line between legal argument and social judgment blurs, because the jurors are not isolated professionals. They are your neighbors, and they bring the city's social instincts into the decision. Time in court is managed in practical ways. Speeches can be timed with a water clock. That detail matters because it shows how the system tries to shape fairness. Each side has a limited time to argue, and the flow of water becomes a neutral, visible boundary. Still, fairness is never perfect. A skilled speaker can pack more persuasion into a limited time. A nervous speaker can waste the same time and lose. The courtroom rewards confidence, and confidence often correlates with class, education, and status. So even in a system that calls itself democratic, inequality shows up in voice. The types of cases can range from private disputes to public accusations, property disputes, contracts, debt, injury, slander, questions of citizenship, charges tied to public corruption, religious accusations. The court becomes a place where personal conflict can turn into a civic event. A neighborhood feud can become a formal trial. A business dispute can become a public performance. And because losing can mean fines, loss of rights, or worse, the pressure can be intense. This is also why ancient Greek life can feel so reputation-focused. If your name is damaged, your legal position weakens. If your household is known as unreliable, people hesitate to do business. If you are seen as violent or unstable, jurors may punish you harder. Law is not only rules on stone. Law is the city's opinion, organized into procedure. Policing exists, but it doesn't always look like a modern police force. Citizens are expected to play a role in bringing accusations. Arrests and enforcement can involve officials and public slaves. In Athens, there are accounts of Scythian archers, public slaves who help maintain order, especially around public gatherings. Picture them at the edges of a crowd. Foreign faces. Weapons present, even if not constantly drawn. A reminder that the city's order is backed by force when necessary. That detail carries an irony. A city proud of citizen freedom still relies on enslaved outsiders to help control the crowd. Public life is also filled with smaller civic obligations that feel ordinary until they pile up. Serving on a jury, serving on a council, attending assembly meetings, paying fees, providing military service, participating in local religious duties. These obligations pull time away from farming and crafts. They constrain poor households. That's part of why some cities introduce pay for certain civic participation, so poorer citizens can afford to show up. Even so, time remains the real cost. A day spent in court is a day not spent earning. A day spent at an assembly is a day not spent repairing tools. For a household with thin margins, civic duty can feel like a luxury the city demands. And yet the same duty can feel like dignity. For a citizen, participation is proof of belonging. It is proof that you are not merely surviving, you are part of the body that decides. Some cities also develop dramatic mechanisms for political safety. Athens has practices like ostracism, where a vote can send a powerful figure away for years, not as a criminal punishment, but as a pressure release, an attempt to prevent any one person from becoming too dominant. Whether that feels like protection or fear depends on where you stand. If you are a common citizen, it might feel like a defense. If you are a rising leader, it might feel like a threat. Either way, it shows how seriously the polis takes internal stability. Now, step out of Athens for a moment. In many Greek cities, councils of elders or elites carry significant power. In Sparta, the system is famous for its rigid structure. There are kings. There is a council of elders. There are officials who oversee and constrain decisions. The citizen body is narrower. The military focus is heavier. Public life is shaped by discipline and hierarchy. If Athens can feel like a noisy crowd deciding its fate, Sparta can feel like a controlled machine that demands conformity. Both systems create different daily atmospheres. In one, argument is expected. In the other, restraint is prized. But in both, the polis is present. It reaches into how people speak. It reaches into how families plan. It reaches into how people imagine the future. There is also a simple physical truth about ancient Greek public life. A city is small enough that you can run into the same people again and again. If you insult someone in public, you might see them tomorrow. If you vote against someone's proposal, you might share a bench with them at a festival. If you accuse someone in court, their relatives may live down the street. That makes civic conflict intimate. It also makes reconciliation necessary. A city cannot function if every argument becomes permanent war. So people learn a strange balance. They shout. They insult. They compete. And then they continue living beside each other. This constant friction produces a culture that values self-control and performance. You learn how to speak without crossing certain lines. You learn when to back down. You learn how to frame your anger as civic concern. And you learn that your reputation is always being measured. Public life can be exhausting. It can be inspiring. It can be terrifying. It can be boring. It can involve long stretches of waiting while officials sort things out. It can involve sudden moments when a single vote changes the direction of the city. And because that public life exists alongside ordinary household pressure, food, work, family, the result is a society where politics is not a separate category. It is a layer resting on top of daily survival, a layer you cannot fully avoid, a layer that can reward you with belonging, and a layer that can punish you publicly in a way that follows you all the way back to your front door. In the Greek world, religion is not mainly a private belief tucked away inside someone's mind. It is habit. It is calendar. It is public duty. It is the quiet gesture made before a meal and the loud procession that closes a city street. It is the way people swear promises, the way they explain luck, the way they mark birth and marriage and death. And for most households, it is not a separate part of life. It is woven into the same routine that includes grinding grain, carrying water, and mending cloth. The sacred is close. Sometimes it is literally inside the home. A small household shrine, a corner with a figurine, a simple altar stone darkened by smoke, a little bowl for offerings. Not grand, not expensive, but present. Because the household wants protection. It wants good fortune. It wants a stable supply of food. It wants children to survive. It wants storms to pass. It wants neighbors to be calm. And it wants the gods to notice the difference between a respectful home and a careless one. Religion at this level can feel almost practical. Not because people don't take it seriously, but because daily life gives them endless reasons to take it seriously. A crop can fail. A child can get sick. A ship can disappear. A lawsuit can ruin a family. So people learn to treat the invisible world as something you maintain. Like a roof. Like a storage jar. Like a relationship. Offerings are often small. A pinch of grain tossed into a fire. A splash of wine poured out before drinking. A bit of oil. A few herbs. A small cake. Sometimes the offering is more than food. A lock of hair. A ribbon. A simple object left at a shrine. Not everything sacred is expensive. Often, the gesture matters more than the cost. And the gesture is repeated until it becomes instinct. Before you eat, you honor. Before you travel, you honor. Before a major decision, you honor. When a child is born, you honor. When someone dies, you honor. The gods are treated as part of the household's network. Not friends. Not equals. Powers that can be pleased, angered, ignored, or courted. And even the language of daily life reflects that. Oaths are common. To swear by a god is not casual. It is inviting consequence. It's a way to say this promise is not only between us, it is watched. That gives an oath weight in a world where written contracts are not always common, and where reputation is everything. Clean and unclean matter too. Not as a modern medical category, but as a sacred category. Certain events, death, childbirth, certain forms of contact, can be seen as creating a state that requires cleansing before one approaches certain sacred spaces. Water becomes part of religion again. Washing hands, rinsing, purifying. A simple act that blends hygiene and sacred readiness. Household religion also includes protection at the doorway. The door is a boundary, and boundaries attract attention. A household may mark the entrance with signs of protection, small symbols, wreaths during festivals, and familiar practices meant to keep the home in good standing. Inside, the hearth carries its own sacred weight. The hearth is not only a place to cook, it is the heart of the home. It is warmth and continuity. It is where guests can be welcomed. It is where family gathers. And because it holds that role, it easily becomes sacred. The smoke from the hearth, rising into the open air, can feel like a message. A daily reminder that the household exists under the sky, exposed to chance, and still trying to keep order. Religion also lives in the city. Every polis has its sanctuaries, temples, altars, sacred groves, shrines at crossroads, small statues in niches. Some are monumental. Some are so ordinary that you pass them without pausing. But even the small ones hold meaning. They are landmarks of the sacred. They remind you that the city belongs to the gods as much as to the citizens. The temple itself is not always the main place where sacrifice happens. Often, sacrifice happens at the altar outside, under open air, fire, smoke, the smell of burning fat, the sound of chanting, the hush that falls over a crowd when something important is being done. Religion in the city is also money. Temples can hold wealth. Offerings accumulate. Treasuries exist. A city's sacred sites can act as financial anchors. That doesn't mean everyone thinks of religion cynically. It means religion is not separated from practical life. When something is sacred, people protect it. When people protect it, it becomes a stable place to store value. That stability changes the city. Festivals are where religion becomes impossible to ignore. A festival changes the tempo of the streets. Work slows. People wash. People dress differently. Garlands appear. Music appears. The city starts to feel like it is holding its breath for a shared moment. Festivals are not only religious events, they are civic events. They are social events. They are political events. They are economic events. Because festivals create demand. Food, wine, animals, wreaths, incense, oil. People buy what they can. Vendors prepare. The market shifts. And households that can afford it try to show their best face. A festival procession is a physical thing. It is people moving together. It is sound bouncing off stone. It is the rhythm of feet. It is the weight of offerings carried through the street. A child watching from the side learns what the city honors. A young person walking in the procession learns how it feels to be part of something larger. An outsider watching learns where they stand. And even someone who dislikes crowds is pulled into the day's atmosphere. The festival announces, the calendar is not yours alone. It belongs to the polis and the gods. Sacrifice is one of the most intense shared rituals. An animal brought forward. A moment of quiet. A prayer. A blade. Then smoke. Then meat. That last part matters. Sacrifice connects the sacred and the everyday in the most literal way. It can be one of the times when ordinary people eat meat. Not as a private luxury, but as a communal distribution. The city's religion becomes the city's meal, and that meal becomes memory. It becomes the smell you associate with a particular season. It becomes the day you remember years later. It becomes the day a friend sang too loudly. It becomes the day a child stared in wide-eyed fascination. It becomes the day the city felt united. Even if the unity lasts only until the next argument. Religion also structures time through smaller, repeated sacred days. Monthly rites. Local celebrations. Household anniversaries. Days tied to particular gods in particular places. A city's calendar can be dense with sacred obligations. Some are joyful. Some are solemn. Some are simple, like a day when certain activities are avoided, or when a particular offering is expected. This makes time feel textured. Not a smooth stretch of identical days. A series of days with different rules, different moods, different social expectations. Then there are the sacred spaces that promise healing. In a world with limited medical tools, places associated with healing can become magnets for hope. People travel. They bring offerings. They sleep in sacred precincts. They look for signs. They interpret dreams. They ask priests in attendance for guidance. Sometimes healing happens. Sometimes it doesn't. But even when it doesn't, the act of seeking help creates structure. It gives suffering a path. It gives fear a ritual. It gives the sick person and the household something to do besides waiting. Religion also shows up in what people fear. Divine anger. Pollution. Bad omens. A bird flying the wrong way. A strange dream. An unexpected earthquake. A sudden illness. A run of bad luck. Humans are pattern-making creatures. In a world with sharp uncertainty, signs become meaningful. People consult seers. They ask for interpretations. They watch for omens before voyages and battles. They read significance into accidents. Sometimes this is sincere belief. Sometimes it is caution. Sometimes it is political. Because a sign can be used. A leader can claim a favorable omen. An opponent can argue the gods are displeased. Religion becomes language for persuasion. A city can be steered by what it believes the gods want. And even individuals who quietly doubt still live inside a society where sacred language has real force. Mystery cults exist too, forms of worship that emphasize initiation, secrecy, and personal experience. For some people, this offers comfort, a promise that the world is not only harsh, a sense of belonging that is not limited to citizenship, a ritual that feels intimate rather than civic. But even here, mystery is not necessarily rebellion. It is another layer, another door into the sacred, another way to seek stability. The most universal sacred events, though, are the ones tied to life's turning points. Birth, coming of age, marriage, death. Birth includes rituals that acknowledge the household's new member and ask for protection. A child is not only a child. A child is the future of the household. A child is a hope that needs guarding. So offerings may be made. Names may be given in formal ways. Family and friends may gather. And even in a poor home, some effort is made to mark the moment, because the moment matters. Marriage includes its own rituals. Not only legal arrangements, but sacred acknowledgement, processions, songs, offerings, meals. The movement of a bride from one household to another is not treated as ordinary travel. It is treated as a threshold, a crossing that needs sacred recognition. Because the household is a sacred unit too. Its continuity is not only practical, it is moral. It is watched. Death is where religion becomes both tender and heavy. The body must be cared for, washed, prepared, mourned. Ritual lament can fill a house. Voices can rise. Clothing can be torn. Hair can be cut. And then the body must be moved. Burial or cremation depends on local custom and period, but in either case, the dead must be treated correctly. Because the dead are not just gone. They become part of the household's memory and duty. They become ancestors. They become a presence that can bless or trouble. They become part of the line that continues. Funerary offerings can be made. Food and drink can be brought. The household can return to the grave at intervals, not only out of grief, but out of obligation. And through mourning, the community sees what kind of household you are. How you honor the dead reflects on the living. Religion also shapes the city's shared stories, not as long retellings, but as shared reference. A god's name can stand for a whole set of expectations. A shrine can carry local legends. A festival can retell a city's identity each year without needing to explain it. When people speak about justice, they may invoke divine order. When people speak about hospitality, they may invoke divine protection. When people speak about oath-breaking, they may invoke divine punishment. This doesn't always mean everyone is constantly pious. People complain. People joke. People cut corners. People fail to do what they promised. People show up at festivals for food and social reasons as much as sacred ones. Religion is not a pure, spotless force. It is human. It lives inside human motivations. But that's what makes it powerful. It is available to everyone, in some form. A wealthy person may dedicate expensive gifts. A poor person may offer a small pinch of grain. Both acts are understood. Both are part of the same language. Sacred time is also a way of resting. Not always restful in the sense of lying down, but restful in the sense of stepping out of ordinary labor. A festival can give you permission to pause, to gather, to eat differently, to sing, to watch performances, to be part of a crowd that isn't focused on work. Even when festivals are tiring, they can still feel like relief because they break the endless repetition of survival tasks. Religion, in that way, becomes one of the main tools for endurance. It explains misfortune. It offers hope. It creates community. It organizes time. It gives meaning to life's most frightening edges. And for someone living in a small house with limited reserves, that meaning is not abstract. It is a way to keep going, a way to stand up in the morning, a way to look at the sky and believe that the household's small offerings might be noticed. So the sacred stays close, in the hearth, in the doorway, in the calendar, in the crowd, in the grave, in the quiet moment before a meal, when a person pauses, even briefly, and offers a small part of what they have to powers they cannot control. For many people in the ancient Greek world, danger is not an extraordinary interruption. It is a presence, a low hum in the background of ordinary days. It sits behind work, behind food, behind family planning, behind every trip outside the walls. And the reason it feels constant is simple. There are fewer buffers. A small mistake can become a lasting injury. A minor infection can become fatal. A bad harvest can become hunger. A short run of bad luck can become debt. Even a peaceful year can carry risk in its corners. Health begins in the home because the home is where most care happens. If someone wakes up with a fever, you do not call an ambulance. You watch. You try to reduce suffering. You offer water. You adjust food. You hope the fever breaks. You might call on a neighbor with experience. You might seek a healer. You might use household remedies. You might pray. And you might do all of those at once. Because people are practical. They use every option they can. Household medicine can include simple, common-sense care, rest, warmth, clean water when possible, herbs, oil, honey, bandaging, but it also includes limitation. There is no knowledge of bacteria. There are no antibiotics. There are no modern anesthetics. Pain is not easily muted. And even when skilled physicians exist, and they do, the tools are limited and outcomes are uncertain. Injuries are every day. A farmer cuts a hand. A sailor slips on a wet deck. A child falls from a wall. A potter burns an arm. A stone chip flies into an eye. A broken bone can change a life. Even if it heals, it may heal wrong. And physical labor does not pause because you are hurting. If you cannot work, the household suffers. So people work through pain. They limp. They wrap injuries. They grit teeth. They keep going. Hygiene exists, but it looks different across places. Some cities have public baths. Some have better drainage. Some have fountain houses that shape daily washing routines. But water is always labor. And when water is scarce, cleanliness becomes selective. Hands might be washed before sacred activity. Faces might be rinsed. But full-body bathing is not always common, not always possible, and not always prioritized over survival tasks. Waste has to go somewhere. In some homes there are pits. In some neighborhoods there are drains. In some cities there are organized systems that move waste away. In others, people manage with routines that keep the worst of it from staying too close. This reality affects health. Illness spreads. Parasites exist. Food spoils. And without modern sanitation, outbreaks can move fast. Childhood sickness is especially feared. A cough that lingers. A fever that returns. A stomach illness that weakens a child quickly. A household can do everything right and still lose someone. That loss becomes part of memory. It becomes part of how adults watch their remaining children. It becomes part of how people talk about the gods, fate, and luck. Now consider travel. Travel is work. It is time. It is exposure. If you walk, you are on roads that may be rough, narrow, or little more than paths. You carry what you need. You worry about weather. You worry about robbers. You worry about getting lost. You worry about arriving in time. If you travel by sea, speed improves, but risk increases. Storms can rise suddenly. Winds can trap a ship. Reefs can tear wood. A harbor can be unreachable. And for the ordinary person, the sea is not a romantic horizon. It is a place where bodies disappear. Messages travel too, not instantly. News is carried by travelers, merchants, sailors, and messengers. Rumors spreads faster than certainty. A city can live for days inside uncertainty, waiting to learn whether a ship arrived, whether an army won, whether a relative survived. That waiting is its own kind of stress. War is one of the largest dangers, even for those who never hold a spear. War is not only battles. War is disruption. It is men taken from fields. It is ships requisitioned. It is trade interrupted. It is taxes raised. It is fear inside walls at night. For a citizen man in many cities, war is also duty. Training begins young. Weapons cost money. Armor costs money. A household that cannot afford equipment is at a disadvantage. And a household that loses a working adult male loses more than a person. It loses labor. It loses protection. It can lose status. It can lose stability. Even when a man survives, war can change him. Injuries, trauma, exhaustion, a new hardness, a new impatience. The household absorbs that change, and the household continues because it must. War also affects those without political voice. Women manage households while men are away. Foreign residents can be targeted with suspicion. Enslaved populations can face intensified control. The poor can be pushed into harsher labor. In some cities, war creates opportunity. Loot, contracts, new trade. In others, war drains life until it feels like the city is hollowing out. Fear is not always dramatic. It can be quiet. A mother listening for footsteps at night. A merchant checking the horizon for ships. A farmer scanning the sky for weather. A household hearing rumors of plague. A citizen hearing whispers of political accusation. A person feeling the edge of hunger. That quiet fear shapes behavior. It makes people cautious. It makes people sharp. It makes people suspicious. It also makes people dependent on community. Because a household alone is fragile. Neighbors matter. Relatives matter. Networks matter. If you fall sick, you need someone to carry water. If you lose a harvest, you need someone to lend grain. If you face accusation, you need witnesses. If you lose a family member, you need people to help with rights. Death is the one certainty that everyone plans for, even when they don't want to speak about it. Death can arrive quickly. An infection, an accident, childbirth, war, a storm, an outbreak. And because death is familiar, death rituals become structured. When someone dies, the household responds. The body is washed. The body is prepared. Mourning happens. Voices rise. Relatives gather. The dead must be moved and placed correctly. The community witnesses that the household has done its duty. Because duty to the dead is also duty to the living. It proves the household is stable. It proves the household respects the gods. It proves the household remembers where it came from. Graves become places of return. Offerings are made. Memory is renewed. The dead become part of the household's story. And stories matter, because they are one of the few ways a person can feel lasting in a world where the body breaks. If there is a single thread running through danger, health, war, and death, it is the way people learn to live with uncertainty. They plan, they store, they pray, they train, they rely on neighbors, they endure. And they still find room for ordinary joys. Food shared, laughter at a festival, a child learning a song, a quiet evening when the wind is calm and nothing terrible happens. That calm is never guaranteed, but when it comes, it feels like a gift. And when it doesn't, people keep moving anyway, because the household cannot stop. If you want to support more long-form stories like this, stories meant to slow your mind down and carry you gently through the past, please like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment with the next place or era you want to explore. Rest well.